It had been over a century since humanity had first encountered the galactic alliance of species known as the Conclave, a coalition of worlds with technology far surpassing anything Earth had ever developed. At first, the encounter had been marked by peaceful diplomacy and awe, with humans positioned at the very edge of the interstellar stage. But beneath the veneer of friendship, tensions had been quietly building. While Earth had made impressive strides in space exploration, their advances were considered crude by Conclave standards. Still, the humans had earned their respect through sheer willpower and the singular, unyielding drive to survive. And yet, it was this very persistence that would set them on a collision course with a far greater enemy, one that would forever change the course of history. On a dimly lit bridge aboard the Earth defense cruiser Vanguard, Commander Adrian Holt stood before a holographic map of the galaxy, his fingers hovering over the glowing coordinates. The serene, almost sterile hum of the ship's systems did little to calm the storm brewing inside him. Holt had been in this situation before. Tensions had risen with the Conclave in the past, but this was different. This time, there was no room for diplomatic negotiation, no space for compromise. It was a matter of survival. The Conclave had betrayed them. Holt glanced at the tactical console where the battle data from the previous skirmishes flickered erratically. The Zaldari, a ruthless and brutal species, had launched a devastating attack on Earth's colonies, seizing control of key planetary resources that were critical to humanity's defense. The Conclave had, instead of coming to Earth's aid, remained neutral, citing an internal mandate not to interfere in disputes among lesser species. Neutrality had proved fatal. For the first time in human history, Earth had been forced to go to war without the backing of its supposed allies. The Zaldari had outnumbered them, outgunned them, and their brutal tactics were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. They cared little for negotiation, honor, or surrender. It was clear that the Zaldari wanted one thing: to eradicate humanity, to leave Earth's people scattered, broken, and enslaved. But the humans, never ones to back down in the face of insurmountable odds, had done what they always did best. They fought. Now, Holt's mind flashed back to the battle's decisive moment. The Conclave, despite their high-tech weaponry, had ignored Earth's cries for help. With no reinforcements, no advanced fleets, humanity had been left to face the Zaldari alone, armed only with their courage and an unshakable resolve. A chilling message had arrived 2 weeks ago, delivered by the Conclave envoy aboard a sleek, silver ship. The words had been cold and final. Your conflict is not our concern. The Zaldari are beyond your capacity to defeat. Consider your resistance an act of futility. Adrian Holt had been there when the envoy's message arrived. His hands had clenched into fists. The commander had looked around the war room, at the officers and soldiers who had rallied to humanity's cause. In that moment, Holt had realized something fundamental. If humanity didn't stand up for itself now, if they didn't fight and win, their place in the galaxy would be forever relegated to that of a weak, inconsequential species. And so, humanity had taken matters into its own hands. A whisper of a plan had begun to spread through the high-ranking officers, an audacious, risky strategy that would risk everything to turn the tide. It was called Operation Phoenix. The idea was simple yet mind-boggling. Hijack a Conclave superweapon, the Ether Blade, an ancient, continent-shattering device capable of altering the very fabric of space-time. The Conclave had kept the weapon hidden away on a remote planet, under the pretense that it was too powerful for any race to wield. What the Conclave failed to understand was that the very drive to survive and adapt, the human spirit, might be enough to unlock its power. The plan had been set into motion, silently, without the knowledge of the Conclave. Holt and his team had infiltrated the system where the weapon was held. Their mission was simple: steal the Ether Blade, use it against the Zaldari, and reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. But time was running out. The Zaldari were on the move, and their forces were gathering in the outer system, preparing for their next strike. Holt's only hope was that the Vanguard and its crew could reach the weapon before the enemy did. They would have to breach heavily defended enemy territory, outsmart every obstacle the galaxy's deadliest species could throw at them, and do it all without a single word of support from their so-called allies. Standing at the helm of the ship, Holt addressed his crew, his voice unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, locking eyes with each of them, "this is our moment. We will not just survive. We will make the universe remember us. No one gets left behind. The ether blade is ours." As the Vanguard shifted into hyperspace, a storm of unknowns loomed ahead, and the crew of humanity's last hope prepared for a battle that would echo through the stars. The forgotten battle had begun, and in the heart of it, humanity's place in the galaxy would be decided, once and for all. "You said." The Vanguard raced through the void, its sleek form slicing through the darkness of hyperspace like a knife through butter. Commander Adrian Holt paced the bridge, his eyes locked on the swirling expanse of stars outside the viewport. The cold, artificial light of the ship reflected off his hard features, and the silence was thick with tension. Every crew member, from the seasoned officers to the rookies, felt the weight of what they were about to attempt. In less than 2 hours, they would arrive at the coordinates where the Conclave had hidden the ether blade, an ancient weapon said to possess enough power to collapse entire star systems. The planet it was stored on, Feller, was a forsaken rock in the middle of nowhere, a dead world that the Conclave had kept under lock and key. But what was once an uninhabited, forgotten relic had become the last hope for humanity. Holt's mind wandered briefly to the Zaldari forces. They were scattered across the system, lurking in the darkness like predatory beasts waiting to pounce. In the past few weeks, humanity had managed to gain some ground, retaking a few colonies, driving the Zaldari back in several skirmishes. But Holt knew the truth. The Zaldari were relentless, and their war machine was a juggernaut. They would stop at nothing to crush humanity, to break their spirit once and for all. This mission was the only shot they had left. If they failed here, humanity would fall. Lieutenant Sari Vasquez, the ship's tactical officer, broke the silence. "Commander, we're approaching the Feller system. Scanners show minimal activity around the planet. The Zaldari haven't made a move yet." Holt nodded, but there was no comfort in her words. Minimal activity meant only one thing. They were about to walk into the lion's den. He turned to face his team. "All right, everyone. This is it. We're heading into enemy-controlled territory, and we're not going to get a second chance. We go in fast, hit them hard, and get out before they even know we were there." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his officers. Each face reflected a quiet determination, but Holt could see the fear just beneath the surface. He had no illusions about the danger they were about to face. This wasn't a routine operation. There would be no reinforcements, no backup, and no chance to regroup if things went wrong. The crew of the Vanguard had trained for this moment for years, but no amount of training could prepare them for what was to come. "Prepare for dropout," Holt ordered. "Get ready for anything." The crew's movements were synchronized, their hands moving over consoles with practiced precision. Holt stood by the central console, his fingers gripped tightly around the edge of the command chair, as the ship's engines roared to life. The stars outside the viewport stretched and distorted into lines of light as the ship hurtled out of hyperspace and into the cold, unwelcoming embrace of the Feller system. The planet was barren, a rocky, desolate sphere with no signs of life. A ghost world. But the atmosphere above the surface was thick with a hum of military activity. From the scanners, Holt could see hundreds of Zaldari warships hovering in orbit, their sleek, angular forms like vultures circling their prey. The ether blade was somewhere down there, hidden in a vault beneath the planet's surface, guarded by layers of security and the deadly forces of the Zaldari. "Captain," Vasquez said, her voice tight, "we've got incoming. A Zaldari patrol is closing in. They're coming straight for us." Holt's eyes narrowed. They'd been detected. Shields up. Evasive maneuvers. Get us within range of the surface, now. The Vanguard lurched as the ship swerved to the left, narrowly avoiding a blast from the approaching enemy vessel. The Zaldari were no strangers to direct confrontation. Their ships, though faster and more agile than Earth's, lacked the sheer firepower of the Vanguard, a fact Holt planned to exploit. "Ready all weapons," Holt ordered. His voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "Lock onto their engines. Disable them, not destroy." The crew worked with speed and precision. As the Zaldari vessel closed in, Lieutenant Vasquez fired the Vanguard's forward plasma cannons, sending a stream of high-energy blasts into the enemy ship's thrusters. The Zaldari ship staggered, its momentum faltering. "Direct hit. They're losing power," Vasquez reported. But the Zaldari weren't finished yet. The patrol ship released a volley of torpedoes, each one streaking through space with deadly intent. The Vanguard rocked under the barrage, its shields flaring as they absorbed the hits. Holt's teeth clenched. "Return fire. Get us closer to the surface." "We need to land now," he barked. As the ship dove toward Feller, the sky ahead crackled with the energy of the battle. The Zaldari were relentless, and the clock was ticking. Holt knew they couldn't afford a prolonged engagement. They had to get to the surface and find the ether blade before the entire fleet descended upon them. 20 seconds to atmospheric entry, Vasquez warned. "Brace for impact." Holt's eyes locked on the blackened surface below. The Vanguard dipped toward the planet, cutting through the atmosphere with the screeching intensity of reentry. The skies outside ignited with flames, and a storm of debris rained down from the battle above. The ship jolted violently, alarms blaring, and the world outside the viewport was a blur of flames and twisted metal. "We're almost there," Holt muttered. "Get us through this, people." The Vanguard broke through the clouds, the planet's surface rushing up to meet them at breakneck speed. They were about to make history, or be swallowed by the flames of failure. The Vanguard tore through Feller's thick, toxic atmosphere, the ship's hull rattling under the strain. The ground below was an unforgiving expanse of rocky plains and jagged cliffs, with no sign of the ether blade's hidden location. But Holt knew it was there, somewhere, buried deep within the planet's labyrinthine caverns, protected by the Zaldari's most elite forces. The ship's descent was harrowing. Red alarms flashed across the bridge as warning signals screamed in protest. Shuddering violently, the Vanguard fought against the planet's gravitational pull, the autopilot system barely keeping it on course. The weight of the situation pressed down on Holt's chest. He could feel the tension in the air, the anxiety of his crew, the anticipation of what lay ahead. They were not just in a race against the Zaldari. They were racing against time itself. "Get us down on the ground, now," Holt commanded, gripping the armrests of his chair as the ship lurched again. 15 seconds to touchdown, Lieutenant Vasquez reported, her voice cool but tinged with strain. The ground approached faster, the jagged cliffs of Feller's barren landscape becoming clearer. Holt's eyes flickered to the readouts. They were nearing a set of coordinates, an ancient, forgotten facility buried beneath the surface. If the Conclave's intelligence was correct, it was there that the ether blade lay hidden, surrounded by an underground military fortress. Suddenly, a heavy jolt rattled the ship, and a dull roar echoed from the ship's rear engines. The Zaldari had followed them down. "Impact!" Vasquez cried. "We're taking fire from above. One of their ships is targeting us." "Divert all power to shields." "Evasive maneuvers," Holt snapped, his heart racing. They were sitting ducks in the atmosphere, and their chances of surviving any longer in the air were dwindling by the second. The Vanguard shuddered again as plasma fire seared past the ship's hull, sending sparks across the bridge. The ship's momentum wavered as the ground grew ever closer. 10 seconds. Vasquez yelled. Holt gritted his teeth. They couldn't afford to lose altitude. They had no choice but to drop in hot, straight into the heart of enemy territory. "Get ready for impact," he bellowed. With a final gut-wrenching crash, the Vanguard slammed into the rocky surface of Feller, the ship's landing gear skidding against the jagged earth. The ship groaned under the strain, but somehow they had made it. They were on the ground. "Status report." Holt barked. Vasquez quickly checked her terminal, her fingers flying over the controls. "Shields down to 40%. Structural damage moderate, but we're still operational." She paused. "We've got Zaldari forces descending on our position." The ship won't be able to take another hit like that. Holt was already moving. Get a team together. We're on foot from here. Let's move, people. As the Vanguard's landing ramp lowered with a grinding hiss, Holt and his senior officers, Vasquez and Lieutenant Elias Juno, led the charge. The cold air of Feller hit them like a slap to the face, carrying the stench of sulfur and burnt metal. The barren landscape stretched endlessly before them, the horizon marked by twisted rock formations and dark, foreboding clouds. No sign of life, except for the distant rumble of Zaldari forces mobilizing to intercept them. "Commander," Elias said, his voice tight, where exposed here. "The Zaldari are already deploying ground troops to the surface. We won't have long before they lock this entire area down." Holt nodded, his mind working furiously. The underground facility was their only hope. They had to reach it, secure the ether blade, and get out before the Zaldari swarmed the area. Split into teams. "Vasquez, you're with me. We're heading for the facility entrance. Elias, you take the rear with the rest of the team. Keep them off our backs," Holt ordered, his voice calm but urgent. The small team of soldiers, each of them armed to the teeth with cutting-edge weapons, moved swiftly, their boots crunching against the rocky ground. The moment they stepped out into the open, the tension became palpable, a tightening coil in each of their chests. The Zaldari weren't far behind. "Commander incoming," Vasquez shouted, pointing toward a ridge. Holt barely had time to react before a squad of Zaldari shock troops, clad in heavy, reinforced armor, charged over the ridge, their energy rifles raised and firing. Plasma bolts whizzed past, some striking the ground and sending up plumes of burning dust. The soldiers returned fire, their weapons flashing with deadly precision. Holt ducked behind a large boulder, his heart pounding. "Covering fire," he yelled. "Push forward to the facility. We can't stop to fight them off here." Vasquez was already moving, her rifle sending steady bursts of fire toward the enemy, forcing them to duck behind the rocks and outcroppings. Holt sprinted forward, his legs burning with exertion, the distant sounds of battle filling the air. Each step took them closer to the old facility, its ancient walls rising from the planet's surface like a forgotten titan. They were close now, so close that Holt could almost taste it. The entrance loomed ahead, a massive, stone-like door half buried beneath the debris of centuries. It looked as if it hadn't been opened in millennia. But as Holt and his team approached, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low mechanical hum filled the air, the unmistakable sound of Zaldari reinforcements coming from the cliffs. Their time was running out. "Open the damn door," Holt barked at Elias, who had reached the facility's control panel. "I'm working on it," Elias replied, his hands flying over the ancient console. Just a few more seconds. Seconds they didn't have. The Zaldari were nearly upon them. And just when all seemed lost, the stone door began to grind open with a thunderous roar. "Inside. Move," Holt shouted, and they rushed into the facility's darkened depths, the weight of humanity's survival pressing down on them with every step. But even as the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them away from the Zaldari, Holt knew that they had only taken the first step in a much larger battle. The hardest part was still to come. The moment the massive stone door sealed behind them, the oppressive darkness of the ancient facility enveloped Holt and his team. The air inside was cold and musty, a stark contrast to the searing heat of the outside world. The walls were lined with strange, alien markings, but Holt had no time to examine them. His eyes were fixed on one thing, the mission. The facility was quiet, unnervingly so. The hum of distant machinery echoed off the walls, the only sound breaking the otherwise eerie silence. Holt's breath echoed in the tight corridor as he motioned for the team to stay close. They moved cautiously, their weapons raised, every footstep deliberate. The weight of their purpose pressed heavily on them as they advanced deeper into the facility. "Stay sharp," Holt whispered. "We're not alone down here." Elias Juno, the team's tech specialist, scanned the area with a handheld scanner. The readings were erratic, making it difficult to pinpoint anything of value. "Commander, I'm detecting a power source deeper in. It could be the ether blade's chamber," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's not far." Holt nodded grimly. "Lead the way." The corridors twisted and turned like a maze, the architecture clearly of conclave origin, alien, unfamiliar, and unervingly advanced. Strange lights pulsed along the walls, casting an eerie glow that only deepened the sense of foreboding. Despite the cold and the quiet, Holt could feel the weight of the place pressing down on him, as if the very structure of the facility was watching them, waiting. At the end of a long, twisting corridor, Elias paused in front of an enormous blast door, its surface marked with strange symbols. It was the most secure entrance they had encountered so far. "This is it," Elias said, his voice tinged with excitement. "The ether blade is beyond this door." Holt moved forward, his hand resting on the cool surface of the door, feeling the pulse of energy from within. The door was locked, but it wasn't the physical kind of lock they needed to worry about. This facility wasn't just secure with metal. It was protected by something else. A security system, one that would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who attempted to bypass it. Elias quickly set to work, hacking into the facility's control systems. The air around them seemed to grow even colder, and the shadows in the corners of the chamber seemed to shift and move. Holt's instincts were on edge. He could feel the presence of something ancient and hostile, lurking just out of sight. "Commander, there's something wrong," Elias muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I can't get the door open. The security protocols are different. I think they're designed to prevent unauthorized access." "No time for that," Holt snapped. "Can you bypass it or not?" Elias's fingers flew over the interface, his expression tense. "I need a few more seconds. If I can't crack the code, the system might engage the defenses automatically." "Then hurry the hell up," Holt growled, his eyes scanning the corridors behind them. The hum in the air deepened, and Holt felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. Something was coming, something powerful. Before Elias could answer, the facility shook violently, as if something large had shifted within the walls. The floor beneath them rumbled, and a low metallic screech echoed through the darkened halls. Holt's heart skipped a beat. "Something's not right," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Then from the shadows ahead, a figure emerged, a tall, imposing silhouette, its armor gleaming in the dim light. It was Zaldari, but not just any soldier. This was something else. The creature was twice the size of a normal Zaldari, its armor reinforced with black, obsidian-like material that shimmered with an unnatural sheen. Its eyes glowed a malevolent red, and the air around it seemed to warp with the sheer power emanating from its form. This was a Zaldari elite, a warrior who had been genetically enhanced for one purpose only: to kill. "Commander," Vasquez shouted, pointing her weapon at the figure. "We've got company." The Zaldari elite's voice was a guttural growl, a deep, resonating sound that sent a chill through Holt's bones. "You should not have come here, humans," it boomed, its hand flexing to reveal massive claws, each one capable of slicing through steel. "We're not leaving without the ether blade," Holt said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "Get ready." The Zaldari elite roared, charging at them with terrifying speed. The ground trembled under its heavy footfalls, and the very air seemed to crackle with energy. Holt raised his rifle, firing a burst of plasma energy at the creature, but the bolts bounced off its armor with barely a spark. "Damn it, it's too strong." Elias yelled, backing away. The Zaldari elite was upon them in an instant, swinging its massive clawed arm toward Holt. The strike was too fast to avoid. Holt threw himself to the side just in time, but the creature's claws grazed his arm, tearing through his armor and sending a sharp pain through his body. "Commander," Vasquez cried, her voice filled with urgency as she fired another round into the elite, but the creature barely flinched. "Fall back," Holt ordered, his heart racing as he struggled to regain his footing. The Zaldari elite was relentless, its movements fluid and powerful. It was a killing machine, born and bred for war, and they were just ants to it. The elite lunged again, but this time Elias was ready. He had managed to hack into the facility's systems just in time to release a barrage of automated defense drones. They shot toward the elite, distracting it long enough for the team to retreat further into the facility. "Move, move," Holt shouted, as they sprinted toward the entrance of the Ether Blade's chamber. The Zaldari elite shrieked in fury as it swatted the drones away, its massive claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. It wasn't going to let them escape, not without a fight. The massive door to the inner chamber groaned, and with a final desperate hack, Elias disabled the security lock. The door slammed open with a force that sent echoes through the dark halls. "Inside now," Holt ordered, as the team scrambled through the threshold, narrowly escaping the elite's reach. As the door slammed shut behind them, the team stood panting in the silence of the Ether Blade's chamber. Before them lay the weapon, glowing, ancient, and impossibly powerful. But the battle was far from over. The Zaldari would be coming, and Holt knew that securing the Ether Blade was just the beginning of their fight. They had found the weapon. Now they had to survive it. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadows above, stretching hundreds of meters into the darkness. The walls were etched with intricate symbols that glowed faintly, casting a soft, eerie light over the scene. In the center of the room, standing on a raised platform, was the Ether Blade, an ancient weapon like no other. It was a massive, crystalline blade, pulsing with an ethereal energy that seemed to warp the very air around it. The weapon's hilt was intricately crafted, adorned with alien runes, and its blade shimmered with an otherworldly glow, as though it were made of pure energy instead of solid metal. For a moment, Holt stood frozen, staring at the blade. It was beautiful, terrifying in its perfection, but also unsettling. He could feel the power emanating from it, a hum of energy that seemed to resonate in his bones. "This is it," Elias whispered, his voice awestruck as he slowly approached the platform, his fingers reaching out, but hesitant to touch the weapon. "This is what we've been fighting for." Holt clenched his jaw, keeping his gaze locked on the Ether Blade. His mind raced with the implications of it. A weapon of unimaginable power, capable of wiping out entire fleets, or even altering the fabric of space itself. It was humanity's last hope, but only if they could control it. "Get ready," Holt murmured. "We're not the only ones who know this place exists." No sooner had he spoken than the distant rumble of boots echoed through the facility's corridors, growing louder by the second. The Zaldari were close. Vasquez's voice crackled over the comms. "Commander, we've got incoming more of them. They're not giving up." Holt didn't need to be told twice. The time for hesitation had passed. He stepped forward, but before he could make it to the platform, a voice, deep, menacing, and undeniably familiar, boomed through the chamber, echoing off the walls. "You think you can take it, human?" The Zaldari elite, the one they'd barely escaped earlier, stepped into view, its massive frame filling the doorway. Its glowing eyes fixed on them like a predator locking onto its prey. Behind the elite, a small squad of regular Zaldari shock troops emerged, weapons raised and aimed directly at the team. The elite was not alone. "You're too late," the elite growled, its voice thick with contempt. "The Ether Blade is beyond your control. It is meant to serve the Zaldari. Your species is nothing but insects in the face of its power." Holt's hand instinctively went to his sidearm, but he knew it would be useless against the overwhelming force of the Zaldari elite. Their only hope was the Ether Blade itself. "We'll see about that," Holt said coolly, his eyes narrowing. The Zaldari elite stepped forward, its massive claws scraping against the floor with each movement. It was an unstoppable force, designed for one purpose: to destroy everything in its path. "Move," Holt shouted to his team, motioning for them to fan out. "Take cover and prepare to fight." The squad fired immediately, but the elite simply deflected their shots with ease, its armor nearly impervious to their weapons. The shock troops, meanwhile, launched their own barrage of plasma fire, forcing the team to dive behind nearby structures for protection. "Commander, what now?" Elias shouted, ducking behind a large pillar as energy blasts flew overhead. Holt's mind was working fast. They were outgunned, outmanned, and outclassed. The ether blade was their only chance. He needed to buy them enough time to figure out how to activate it, but the Zaldari were relentless. The chamber rumbled again as the elite let out a guttural roar, charging forward at terrifying speed. It was a blur of motion, closing the distance in seconds. "Vasquez," Holt called out, his voice urgent. "Take the left flank. Keep the shock troops distracted. Elias, get to the control panel. We need to figure out how to activate the ether blade. Now." Vasquez nodded, already sprinting toward the left side of the room, where she took cover behind a broken column and began returning fire, her weapon lighting up the dark space. Her shots were accurate but futile. Nothing seemed to faze the elite. Meanwhile, Elias dashed to the control panel at the base of the ether blade's platform, his fingers flying over the interface. The Zaldari elite, realizing their strategy, roared in anger and redirected its assault toward Elias. Holt moved without thinking. He sprinted across the open floor, charging toward the elite in a desperate bid to save Elias. But just as he was about to engage, something remarkable happened. The ether blade, glowing brighter now, hummed louder. The very air seemed to warp, as though the weapon itself was reacting to the chaos around it. A pulse of energy surged from the blade, flooding the chamber with an intense, blinding light. For a split second, time seemed to slow. Holt felt a strange connection to the blade, a surge of power, like a current running through his veins. His body tensed, his muscles seemingly supercharged by the weapon's energy. The elite stumbled back, confused, its glowing red eyes narrowing in fury as it felt the power of the blade pushing against it. Holt could see the shift. This wasn't just a weapon. It was alive, in a sense. It responded to will, to purpose. Without thinking, Holt's hand shot out, and as if guided by some unseen force, he grasped the hilt of the ether blade. The moment his fingers made contact with the weapon, an overwhelming flood of power surged through him, overwhelming his senses. His vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might lose control. But then it was clear. The ether blade was not just an object of destruction. It was a tool of defense, a protector for those who were worthy. Holt could feel it now, as if the blade was choosing him. His mind sharpened, his body more attuned to the world around him. The Zaldari elite charged again, its massive claws swinging toward Holt. But in that instant, Holt's body moved with reflexes that were no longer his own. He raised the blade, and with a single swift motion, cleaved through the air. The ether blade met the elite's claws, and in an explosion of light and force, the creature's arm was severed clean off. The Zaldari elite screamed in agony, stumbling backward, its shock troops hesitating as their leader faltered. Holt stood there, breathless, the ether blade humming in his hands. He could feel the sheer power coursing through him. He had control now. The rest of the team stood in stunned silence, watching in awe as Holt raised the blade once more. "We're not done yet," Holt said, his voice heavy with the weight of what was to come. "Now we finish this." The battle had only just begun, but now, with the ether blade in his hands, Holt knew that humanity had a chance, not just to survive, but to win. The Zaldari elite staggered back, its howls of rage reverberating through the chamber as it clutched its severed arm. The sight of the massive creature faltering before him was surreal to Holt, as though he were witnessing a dream. But the power of the ether blade coursing through him was no illusion. It was real, and it was theirs. For the first time since their landing on Feller, Holt felt a spark of hope. The remaining Zaldari shock troops hesitated, the loss of their leader sending a ripple of uncertainty through their ranks. The elite's scream of pain echoed in the chamber, and for a moment, the battlefield fell silent. But Holt knew this would not last. The Zaldari were relentless, and now that they had seen what the ether blade could do, they would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. "Vasquez, Elias, get ready," Holt shouted, his voice a mixture of urgency and command. Vasquez, still crouched behind cover, popped her head out and fired a series of shots at the remaining Zaldari forces, forcing them to take cover behind pillars and walls. Her eyes narrowed, calculating the next move as she pivoted to get a better angle. Elias, his face pale with the sudden onslaught of energy that had flooded through the room, steadied himself, and nodded at Holt. "Commander, the system's responding. I think I found a secondary control mechanism in the Aetherblade's core," he called out, his fingers dancing over a nearby console that had sprung to life with the blade's activation. "I can't get full control, but I can send out a burst of energy. We need to coordinate, now." Holt's grip tightened around the hilt of the ether blade, the cool energy of the weapon pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. He could feel the weapon resonating within him, as if it were waiting for the right moment to unleash its true power. "Do it," Holt commanded. Elias nodded, and with a flick of his fingers, the console flashed. A burst of blinding light shot from the core of the ether blade, sweeping outward in a wave of energy that staggered the remaining Zaldari troops. The force of it knocked them off their feet, sending them crashing to the ground as their weapons shorted out, sparking and smoking. For a fleeting moment, the tide of the battle shifted. The Zaldari elite, its rage-fueled fury only intensifying, roared and threw itself forward again, but Holt was faster. He raised the ether blade, and with a motion that seemed too fluid to be real, he swung the weapon in a wide arc. The blade cut through the air like a beam of light, and in a single stroke it cleaved through the Zaldari elite's remaining limb, sending the creature sprawling to the ground, shrieking in pain. The remaining Zaldari forces, their morale shattered, hesitated for a brief moment. But it was all Holt needed. "Vasquez now," Holt shouted, his eyes burning with determination. Vasquez sprang into action. From her position, she unleashed a flurry of well-placed shots that disarmed the remaining shock troops. The Zaldari, now disoriented and reeling from the sudden onslaught, were no match for the highly trained human soldiers. But as the last Zaldari soldier fell, Holt knew they weren't out of danger yet. The real threat was the coming reinforcements. The Zaldari weren't just going to let this facility fall without a fight. "Commander," Elias called out, his voice tense as he scanned the data from the console. "There's something else, something bigger. The Zaldari have a fleet on standby, ready to strike. They'll be here in minutes." "We don't have minutes," Holt said, his gaze narrowing. "We need to finish this, now. Elias, can you activate the facility's self-destruct sequence?" Elias hesitated, his brow furrowing. "I can try, but I'll need full access to the central core. The Zaldari will have it locked down, though. It's not going to be easy." "We don't have a choice," Holt replied, his voice resolute. "We can't leave here with the ether blade if we don't destroy the entire facility. The Zaldari can't get their hands on it. Not now, not ever." Without waiting for a response, Holt turned to Vasquez. "Hold this position. I'm going to cover Elias. Let's make this fast." Vasquez nodded, her jaw clenched in determination. "Got it." Holt's mind raced as he led Elias deeper into the facility, the ether blade's glow casting an eerie light on the walls. The central core was located at the heart of the complex, beyond another series of blast doors. They moved quickly, each step a race against time. Behind them, the sound of Zaldari reinforcements grew louder, their footfalls reverberating through the metal halls. When they reached the next set of blast doors, Elias immediately began working on the terminal. His fingers flew over the console, his breath shallow with the pressure mounting on them. "It's locked down tight," Elias muttered, frustration creeping into his voice. "I can't bypass the encryption without triggering their alert systems." "Do it anyway," Holt said, his eyes scanning the approaching threat. "We don't have time for hesitation." Elias shot him a quick glance before typing in a final command. A few moments later, the doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, the central core was a massive chamber, filled with pulsating machinery and a massive containment field that held the heart of the facility. In the center of the room stood a massive column, its base buried deep into the floor, emitting a low hum of energy. "The core. Get to the center of the room, Elias," Holt said, his voice tense. "I'll hold them off." Elias didn't protest. He sprinted toward the core, and as he did, Holt turned and faced the incoming Zaldari. The blast doors hissed open, revealing a battalion of Zaldari shock troops, led by an even larger elite, this one adorned in dark, spiked armor that gleamed with an eerie purple hue. The new elite was an abomination of speed and power, even more terrifying than the first. "We don't have much time, Holt," Elias shouted. His voice strained as he reached the core and began manipulating its systems. "Hold on, Elias. Just a little longer," Holt growled, raising the ether blade as the Zaldari elite advanced toward him. He could feel the weapon's power thrumming in his hand, eager to be unleashed once more. He wasn't going to back down. The elite lunged with a speed that made the air crackle, but Holt anticipated it. With a swift motion, he parried the attack, the ether blade singing through the air as it clashed with the elite's weapon. Sparks flew. They were locked in a deadly dance now, the Zaldari elite attacking with fury and precision. But Holt was no longer fighting with just his body. He was fighting with the ether blade's power, harnessing it, flowing with it. With a battle cry, Holt surged forward, using the momentum of the blade to knock the elite back, disorienting it for just a moment. That was enough. With a roar of effort, Holt cleaved through the elite's weapon, and in one final swing, decapitated the creature, sending it crashing to the ground in a heap of charred metal and blood. Behind him, Elias' voice cracked through the comms. "Holt, I've activated the self-destruct. We need to get out, now." The countdown began. Without hesitation, Holt turned, grabbed Elias by the arm, and sprinted toward the exit. They had no time to waste. The entire facility was about to collapse. The countdown ticked down. The light of the ether blade was the last thing they saw as they ran for their lives. The ground trembled beneath their feet as Holt and Elias sprinted through the facility's winding corridors, the countdown echoing in their ears. They had no time to look back. The massive explosion they had triggered would soon bring the entire complex crashing down. The ether blade, glowing fiercely in Holt's hands, seemed to hum with an energy all its own, as though it was feeding off the chaos around them. The Zaldari were beaten, but the consequences of their actions were far from over. The facility shook again, a deep, resonating rumble that sent dust falling from a ceiling. Holt's heart pounded in his chest as they reached the exit, where Vasquez was waiting, her eyes scanning the horizon, her gun raised and ready. "Come on," Holt shouted, grabbing Elias by the shoulder and pushing him forward. They had mere seconds to escape. They burst out into the open, the landscape of Feller sprawling out before them. The skies overhead were filled with the remnants of the Zaldari fleet, retreating from their failed invasion. They were scattered, disorganized, and in chaos. The humans had won, but the battle had left its scars. The ground behind them trembled once more, and the sky above lit up with a blinding flash of white as the facility erupted in a cataclysmic explosion. The shock waves slammed into them, knocking them to the ground. Holt's vision blurred, the ringing in his ears deafening. For a moment, he wondered if they had all just died in the blast. Then, as the dust cleared, he heard Vasquez's voice, sharp and urgent. "Commander, Elias." Groaning, Holt pushed himself up, blinking away the haze in his mind. The ether blade still pulsed in his hands, its light now more subdued, yet its power was undeniable. Elias was already on his feet, his face grim but resolute. "We need to go," Elias said, his voice tight. "The fleet's already starting to regroup. We've won, but the war's not over. They'll be back, faster than we think." Holt's gaze shifted to the horizon, where the remnants of the Zaldari fleet were beginning to warp away, retreating into the dark void of space. They had managed to cripple their forces here on Feller, but Holt knew this was just the beginning of a much larger struggle. The Zaldari would not forget this loss. And now humanity had a weapon, one that the universe could never ignore. "Let's move," Holt ordered, his voice hard as stone. "We've got one shot at this." The team moved quickly, making their way to the extraction point, the battered but victorious remnants of humanity's most daring mission. The ether blade hung at Holt's side, its power an undeniable presence, a symbol of their triumph and the uncertainty ahead. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. The Zaldari had underestimated humanity. They had thought they were just another species in the galaxy, one among many, destined to be wiped away by the might of the Conclave's armies. But humanity had shown them something they couldn't have imagined: the ability to stand against insurmountable odds, to adapt and overcome. Holt had unlocked the power of the ether blade, and now they would hold the fate of the universe in their hands. As they neared their extraction ship, Holt couldn't shake the feeling that this battle, this war, had already changed the course of history. The power of the ether blade would only grow in the hands of the human race. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a symbol of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. "We'll be ready for the next wave," Holt said, his voice steady and calm. He could already hear the distant sounds of the extraction ship's engines, the promise of escape. But there was no illusion of safety. They were about to step into a new age, a dangerous age, where humanity's place in the universe had been irrevocably altered. They climbed aboard the ship, taking their seats and strapping in. As the engines roared to life and the craft lifted off from the barren surface of Feller, Holt stared out the window at the vast expanse of space beyond. The stars seemed distant, cold, and infinite, but for the first time, Holt didn't feel small. He didn't feel insignificant. Humanity had just proven its place in the universe. The Zaldari would return. Of that he was certain. The war was far from over, but Holt had a new understanding of what humanity could achieve. They weren't just another race. They weren't simply fighting to survive. They were fighting to thrive. And with the ether blade in their possession, they now had the means to tip the scales in their favor. "This is just the beginning," Holt muttered to himself, his grip tightening on the hilt of the ether blade. "The universe is about to change." Behind him, Elias and Vasquez exchanged glances, both of them aware of the weight of the moment. But neither spoke. The future was uncertain, but humanity had proven it could stand strong in the face of darkness. As the ship ascended into the stars, Holt glanced at the ether blade once more. It shimmered with an almost sentient energy, as though it, too, recognized the dawn of a new era. And then, with a final glance back at the smoldering remains of the Zaldari facility, Holt turned toward the future, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead.